Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Chantel and today I am very glad to be not sick anymore. I actually got strep throat last week, which is why I didn't get up a video. I haven't gotten up a video for a week or so because yeah, I had strep throat and it sucked and it was really bad. Very unpleasant, but I'm much better now. Little round of antibiotics took care of the problem, and we're back. We're back. So yeah, today I'm going to recap my 2024 R Fantasy Bingo board, which I did in fact complete. Yay! I did it. I completed it. And so I'm gonna just quickly sort of recap the books that I read for this. So yeah, this was my first year doing this challenge, and so I'm very pleased with myself that I did in fact complete all of the prompts. Though as you will see if you watch my sort of TBR video almost a year ago, and then watch this one, you'll see that there's a number of, titles that are different from what I originally planned out, but of course that's always a thing that happens. It's just a thing that happens with me because I'm a big mood reader. And I didn't get quite as many hard mode prompts as I originally wanted, but again, I'm not terribly fussed about hard mode. Hard mode is really just for bragging rights anyway. Like, it doesn't, I mean, none of this means anything, of course. It's just a silly challenge to get me to sort of, read more of the books on my TBR pile. So yeah, I'm not terribly worried about it. But yeah, I'm just going to recap. I'm not going to talk in too much depth about any of the books on this list, just because I've either already done recaps for them in which I went into more detail, or I'm going to do a recap for them. The books that I read this month I'm going to be talking about them in more detail in my next video, which will be my March recap. So these will all have more detailed recaps of them that you can or will be able to watch. So I'm just going to sort of touch on them very lightly as we go. So yeah, the first prompt on the bingo board was to read the first book in a series. And for this prompt, I did complete hard mode because the hard mode was to read the first book in a series that was more than 3 books long, and I read The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nhi Vo, which is of course the first book in the Singing Hills cycle of novellas, of which there are currently 5. So yes, I did complete hard mode for this, and I enjoyed that quite a bit, and I'm still reading that series. I'm almost up to date with that series now. The second prompt was an alliterative title. So again, literally just read a book with an alliterative title. The hard mode, I did not end up completing on this one. I had picked out a couple of hard mode possibilities. I just never got to any of them. So the book I ended up reading for this prompt was Somewhere Beyond the Sea by T.J. Klune. So yeah, alliterative title, yeah, but not hard mode. The third prompt was Under the Surface, so read a book where some part of the book takes place either underground or underwater. Once again, I did not manage to get the hard mode for this. I didn't get to the hard mode picks that I had, so I ended up reading a Star Wars book that qualifies for this. Yeah, it's called Reign of Empire, The Mask of Fear. It's the first in a new trilogy. I'm going to be talking about it in more detail in my March wrap-up, but a section of this book does take place in an underground environment, and so that qualifies and therefore is complete. The fourth prompt I read, the fourth prompt this month was criminals. So to read a book in which a main character is some kind of a criminal, including, this could be a thief, an assassin, a tax fraudster, anything. The hard mode was a heist book. Again, I really wanted to get to a heist book this year. I just didn't get around to one. So I ended up using for this prompt Pyramids by Terry Pratchett, which I just read this month. And of course, our main character, maybe he doesn't, I don't know if he actually does any crimes, but he is technically an assassin. He's a graduate of the Assassin's Guild, and so he does qualify as a criminal. So yeah. So that one is for that prompt. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that in my March wrap-up. The fifth prompt was dreams, to read a book where characters experience dreams, either magical or otherwise. The hard mode for this prompt was that the dreams not be mystical or magical or unusual or prophetic in any way, just to be normal dreams. And I did complete the hard mode on this one because I did read Paladin's Hope for this prompt by T. Kingfisher, and this one, one of the characters has some bad dreams. They're like PTSD-induced nightmares, but they're not like magical or mystical or prophetic or anything like that. They're just bad dreams. So yeah, that was a hard mode prompt. The sixth prompt was entitled Animals, to read a book that has an animal in the title. Any kind of animal will do. The animal does not have to actually feature in the book itself. It just has to be an animal in the title. And I did complete hard mode for this one as well. The hard mode was not really that difficult. It was simply that the animal in the title is a fantasy or sci-fi creature of some kind. And so I read A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. This is the first in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series, and it was quite fun. So yeah, that was that. The next prompt was Bards, and I also completed the hard mode for this one, though this was a little bit more difficult. Of course, the prompt itself was to read a book in which the primary protagonist is a bard, musician, poet, storyteller, some kind of performer like that. And the hard mode of this prompt was to read a book in which the main character is actually, like, literally called a bard, which is a lot more difficult, I think, because a lot of more modern fantasy just does not use that word, certainly not in a sort of more technical sense. But I did read River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross, in which the main character is, in fact, a bard and is called a bard. So that's a hard mode prompt. The eighth prompt was Prologues and Epilogues, to read a book that has either a prologue or an epilogue, and the hard mode, of course, was to read a book with both. This was another prompt that I did complete the hard mode on. I read The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi, and it has both a prologue and an epilogue in it. So yeah, that qualifies, and it was quite good. I enjoyed it a lot. Prompt 9 was to read a self-published or indie published book. So any self-published or indie published book. I think they said it only counts for the challenge if you read it when it was still only self-published. So like some of M.L. Wong's stuff. M.L. Wong is a popular one that is a popular author who's been self-published in the past but is now getting traditionally published. TJ Klune is another one who's like quite popular, has been self-published in the past and is now being more traditionally published. I think even T. Kingfisher is starting to get traditionally published and has done a lot of more smaller indie published stuff and self-published things. So the challenge, I guess, of this was to sort of read an author who is still sort of self-published or still considered a self-published or indie-published author. And I read Dionysus in Wisconsin by E.H. Lupton. And this is a self-published novel. It's the first in a series of self-published novels. It's a queer, sort of historical urban fantasy. It's set in the 60s in Wisconsin, in the Vietnam War. And yeah, it was quite good. I enjoyed it a lot. I'll definitely continue reading the series. And this does, I believe, qualify for hard mode. Well, for me it does. The hard mode version of this is for a self-published novel. It has to have fewer than 100 reviews or fewer than 100 ratings on Goodreads. I don't use Goodreads, and I'm not going to Goodreads to look at the ratings, how many ratings a book has, but I did look at the story graph for Dionysus in Wisconsin, and there are only 79 ratings when I looked a few weeks ago. So for me, that counts as hard mode. The 10th prompt was romantasy. So read a romantasy. I mean, that's pretty basic. The hard mode of this was to read a romantasy where at least one of the main characters is LGBTQIA+, which I also completed the hard mode for this. I read A Power Unbound by Freya Marski. Yeah, I mean, for me, this was like one of the easiest prompts. I read not like a ton of romantasy, but I mean, I certainly dabble in romantasy, romance, fantasy, fantasy romance, whatever you want to call it. And I also read a lot of queer fiction, so it's not like most of the romance fiction I read is queer, so that's not really a big deal for me. 11th prompt is the Dark Academia prompt, which again, not super difficult for me. The hard mode of this was a little trickier, but luckily I had not yet read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, because the hard mode of the Dark Academia prompt is that the school itself is entirely mundane, so it's not a magical school per se, and of course Ninth House is set at Yale, so I read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo for this. The 12th prompt was the multi-POV prompt, so to read a book with at least 3 POV characters. And the hard mode of this was to read a book with at least 5 POV characters, and I did complete the hard mode for this as well. I read The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, which has many POV characters, a number of them. I think I'm probably at least 5 for sure, so. The 13th prompt for this was to read a book published in 2024, published for the first time in 2024, so not a reprint or a new edition, but a new book. I tried to complete the hard mode of this, but I ended up DNFing my hard mode pick. The hard mode pick was that it's also the author's debut novel. And I read a couple of other 2024 debuts, but I read most of them before the start of this challenge. So, yeah, the one that I tried to read, 5 Broken Blades by May Corland, I ended up DNFing. I just couldn't get through it. So I ended up using, for this prompt, Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett, which of course is not a debut novel, but it was published in 2024, and I did read it. So, there we go. The 14th prompt is a character with a disability. So to read a book in which an important character has a physical or mental disability, the hard mode of this was that the character with a mental or physical disability is one of the primary protagonists or a main character of the book. And I did complete hard mode for this. I read Godkiller by Hannah Kaner, and the main protagonist of that book is an amputee. So. For prompt 15, it was simply a book published in the 1990s. The hard mode of this is that the author or one of the authors has also published something in the last 5 years, and I did complete hard mode for this. I read Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb, which was of course published in 98 or 99, and Robin Hobb has still published some short stories, I think, within the last 5 years. So, 16, prompt 16, another hard mode one that I got was Orcs, Trolls, and Goblins. To read a book featuring orcs, trolls, or goblins, the hard mode is that one of the main characters is an orc, troll, or goblin, and I read Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree, in which of course our main character is an orc. 17th prompt was a space opera, so to read a sci-fi space opera book. The hard mode of this was very easy for me as well. It was to read a space opera book written by an author of marginalized gender, so a woman, a trans person, non-binary person, etc., etc. And I read A Desolation Called Peace by Arkady Martin, which is a great, it's the final book in a wonderful space opera duology called the Teixcalon duology. It's great. It's super fun. Loved that book. Number 18 was Author of Color, which again, super easy for me. I read lots of authors that are not white. And the hard mode, I also completed the hard mode of this, which was, it must be a debut novel published in the last 5 years. For this, I read To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Monoquill Blackgoose, which does qualify for hard mode and is quite good. I highly recommend it, and in fact made an entire video recommending this video. recommending this book. The 19th prompt was survival. So to read a book in which the primary objective of the characters is to survive. The hard mode of this was relatively easy, I thought. It was simply to read a book that is not about a super virus or a pandemic. And for this prompt, I read Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. There we go. Got it. And yeah, this qualifies for hard mode. It's also a book that I really enjoyed and made an entire video recommending. So you might want to watch that. Prompt 20 was to judge a book by its cover. So read a book based primarily on your pleasure and your enjoyment in the cover. The hard mode was to pick the book based only on the information available on the front cover. So no blurbs, nothing else, just purely the front cover. I actually did the hard mode of this. I read a book called Alien Clay by Adrian Tchaikovsky. It's my first Tchaikovsky book. I do not want to say anything about it here, except to say that I did enjoy it. And I will talk more about it in my March wrap-up. So stay tuned. But yes, I did complete the hard mode for that one. Prompt 21, set in a small town. Primary setting is a small town. I also completed the hard mode for this one. The hard mode for this is that the small town could be real or fictional, but it must be set in our real world and not be like a secondary world fantasy. So for this, I read Starling House by Alex E. Harrow, which obviously, again, as with most of these books, you can go back and watch my monthly wrap-up video about where I talk about this book in more detail, but yes, it is set in a small town in our real world, and I quite enjoyed it. It was very atmospheric. Prompt 22, 5 SFF short stories. So any 5 short stories or novelettes, and the hard mode, which I also completed, was to read an entire speculative anthology or collection. For this, I read The River of Silver by S.A. Chakraborty, which is a collection of short stories set in her Daevabad world, the world of the Daevabad trilogy, which I really enjoyed. Prompt number 23, which was Eldritch Creatures. So read a book featuring a being that is uncanny, unearthly, or weird. This could be a god or monster from another plane or realm and is usually beyond mortal understanding. The hard mode of this was to read a book not directly related to the Cthulhu mythos, the H.P. Lovecraft Cthulhu mythos. So for this one was pretty tricky, actually, because, man, it's kind of, honestly, like, Eldritch creature that isn't specifically Lovecraftian is honestly kind of difficult to pin down, I feel like. But I ended up landing on Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. I feel like there is a sense in which some of what is going on in Annihilation feels like it's from potentially like another plane of existence. So I'm counting it. I'm counting it. I don't know. I don't know if like the official rules lawyers of our fantasy would count it, but I'm counting it. The 24th prompt is reference materials. So to read a book that includes any additional materials such as map, footnotes, glossary, translation guide, pronunciation, dramatis personae, etc. The hard mode of this was to the book contains at least 2 types of additional materials, so multiple kinds of reference materials. I did read Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse, which does qualify for hard mode for this because it has both a map and also a dramatis personae. It may have other things too, but those are the ones that I remember. I remember it had at least 2, so it qualifies. And finally, the 25th and final prompt was to read a book club or read-along book. So any past or current book club that our fantasy runs on their Reddit page qualifies, and they have a whole spreadsheet of like all their book clubs and all the books that have been read for their book clubs over the years that you could pick from. The hard mode was to read a current selection of one of their book clubs or read-alongs and actually participate in the discussion. I didn't do hard mode for this. I'm really bad. I'm really bad at participating in discussions. I'm not great at stuff like that. especially on Reddit. I've been, in fact, trying to get away from social media and spending lots of time on Reddit, so I didn't do that. So I did not complete hard mode for this, but the book that I chose for this prompt was Circe by Madeline Miller, which I loved, and you can hear me rave about it in a previous video. So yeah, that's my completed 2024 R fantasy bingo board. Again, as I said, I didn't get quite as many hard modes as I wanted. There's a couple there where I like really wanted to get a hard mode, and I probably could have gotten a hard mode if I'd just been a little bit more motivated, but it just didn't happen on a couple of them. But that's fine. I'm not terribly worried about it. I'm excited for the next one to come out. I haven't checked in a few days, but I don't think the new one is out quite yet. I think it's going to be coming out probably like the first week of April. And so I'm planning to do it again because I really enjoyed doing it this time. I think for me, this challenge is a good way for me to hone in on my ever-growing list of books that I want to read, because for me, like, the category of books that I would like to read is always enormous, and it always is growing. And despite the fact that I am largely a mood reader, as I've said in the past, I like to, I do sometimes tend to become overwhelmed by choice, because the list of books that I want to read is just always so long and is always growing. No matter how many books I read, it's never going to get any shorter, really. So challenges like this, for me, are just a good way to sort of narrow down that list a little bit, to hone in on some of the titles that I want to prioritize and focus on over the next year, which is good for me and helpful for me to have just sort of a list of 25 titles or so, or more, you know, possibilities, right? I can come up with other possibilities, and is, of course, subject to change as my priorities change, as my mood changes, whatever. But it's a good way for me to sort of try and narrow down a little bit what it is that I actually plan to read and want to read, to prioritize. So yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. I had a lot of fun doing this challenge, and again, I'm going to do it again in 2025. I'll talk once that 2025 bingo board is out. I'll do a video about that, and I'll talk about it in more depth. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. Did you do this challenge? Did you complete it? Did you get any good titles out of it? Let me know in the comments, or if you liked any of the titles that I did for my prompts. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Bye.